first things first, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us who Petter is, or Mentour Pilot?
Yeah, so I am a 42-year-old Swedish pilot, born and bred in Sweden, and I have been living for the last 13 years in Spain, and now I actually live in Andorra. I've been working as a commercial pilot since I was 20 years old, so for the last coming up to 22 years now. And at the moment, I am a type rating instructor, a type rating examiner on the Boeing 737, and I've been running my YouTube channel, Mentour Pilot, for the last 8 years or so, and for the last 4 years, my second channel, Mentour Now, which is all about aviation, talking about incidents and accidents on Mentour Pilot, and on Mentour Now is a little bit more about the aviation industry as such.
Excellent. Huge fan of your work. Came across your stuff quite a few years ago. I actually used to watch Aircraft Investigation. I don't know if you remember that show back in the day, but I think you're a much better updated and more detailed version of that, which is awesome stuff. It's good to have you on YouTube. So you're from Sweden originally, but you settled in Spain. What about Spain drew you to that country?
So my wife, she's Spanish, and happy wife, happy life. We lived in Sweden for about 7 or 8 years until I found a position in Spain from her hometown, actually. So we had 2 children at the time, which meant that we could move down to Spain and get a little bit of support from her mother as well. And anyone who has small children knows that that's completely invaluable. So that's why we chose to move down.
Definitely fair enough. Okay, makes sense. So you've been flying for a long time now, and you took your first flying lesson from when you were a teenager. It's not a very common, I guess, path. Maybe some people think about it, but actually pursuing it that young, it's quite unique. So what made you decide to take that career path?
So anyone who, and I know everyone who's watching this who feel like they want to become a pilot know what I'm talking about. When you're bitten by the aviation bug, it's nothing you can do about it. Like, this is literally the only thing that you want to do. And that happened to me when I was 14. My dad had taken a private pilot license at the time, and I kind of followed him when he was doing his training. And that's how I started to get up into smaller aircraft. And then they gave me, as a birthday present for my 14th birthday, a test lesson. And that test lesson sealed the deal. Like, after I had done that, that's all I wanted to do. And for me, that was incredibly important because it gave me a pathway. It gave me a goal to head towards. And when you're 14 years old, very few people have a goal, you know? When you have a goal, it means that you know all of those different directions that you can take, all of those different choices that you're faced with, school and so on. All of a sudden, you know exactly what to do. And that's what happened to me. I knew that I needed to study hard to get the grades needed to get into a government-sponsored program for pilots that they actually had in Sweden at the time. So I studied, and I knew, this basically brought me to where I am today, the fact that I started that early.
That's great. Like, knowing that early, that you knew what the path for your life was is quite rare, and that's awesome. But shifting gears a little bit towards your career in YouTube now that you're doing alongside, obviously, your aeronautical experience. How did you decide to get into that?
I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always been interested in, starting companies, trying to do something for myself, because I have a streak in me where I want to create, like a creative part of me that when you're a pilot, you don't really get to do much, because a pilot, when you do your job well, you do exactly what you're told. You go from A to B and possibly back to A again. And a perfect day is where nothing happens. So I didn't really get to use my creative side much. I did become a trainer for this particular reason, because if you're a trainer, then you do get to be a bit creative. You work with people, you try to see how to do things, to teach them, But I still needed something else. And my wife told me, like, you need a hobby. You have spent way too much time at home. You need a hobby, and you like to listen to your own voice. So why not start a YouTube channel? So that's kind of what I did. That's one side of it. And also that I knew that social media was becoming more and more important, but I didn't know enough about it. And the only way to really learn something is to do it. So I thought, if I start up my own YouTube channel, at least I will learn the kind of tricks of the trade and why this is so important. And That's kind of where it came up from. The only thing that I knew that I could talk about without preparing much was aviation, because I'd been working on it for 15 years at that point, and I knew that like I can do good content about aviation already from the get-go. So that was a logical kind of step for me to take.
Yeah. So how did you find it, like in those early days versus how it is now? Because obviously you have a team and everything, but how was that growth process like for you?
So it's been incremental, as I think it is for most YouTube channels. In the beginning, you suck, and everyone always sucks at what they do in the very beginning. But then you find a format, and I think fundamentally it's about giving something to your audience. Like if your point is that you want to explain and make life better for your audience, then you're on the right path, and then you will kind of get better and better as you work along. And I noticed that, but in the beginning, like I was just sitting like I am now, a talking head in front of my iMac and just talking about my experiences as an airline pilot. And even though there was no fancy graphics, even though there was no sound bites, there was no cutting, it was basically just raw video of me talking, there was still enough truth in there for people to realize that there was a value. So the channel started growing. And when I realized that this channel started growing, well, then you get kind of like amped up and you want to improve, and that's what I did. So I started adding a little bit of graphics, started learning a little bit about editing, and that worked well for about a year and a half. But after that, you also realize that you are not good at everything. There are other people out there that are better than you when it comes to editing, creating graphics. So why not start to engage more people, which is what I did. I started reaching out to graphic designers and so on that could join the team. And at the same time, I also realized that what I was doing was very niche. It was very much for people who wanted to become pilots. And of course, there's very few people who want to become pilots globally. There may be a couple of thousands or maybe tens of thousands, but it's not going to be much more than that. But storytelling is powerful. And if I could do what I did, which is to teach people something about aviation, if I can do that in a more general way through the help of storytelling, then I will reach more people. Because if there's only tens or maybe 100,000 people who want to become pilots, there are millions who are interested in aviation and want to get aviation explained, and even more people who are a little bit afraid of it and doesn't really like it. And I realized if I tap into that, I can reach a much broader audience. And that's what the last couple of years have been about on Mentour Pilot, that I've been really honing in on the fact that I can use incidents and accidents to tell the story of how safe aviation actually is, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but it does work.
And that actually leads me to my next point, or possibly, but do you find or see around online or anywhere else any misconceptions about the aviation industry, whether that's myths or just anything that you hear?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of them. I mean, first of all, the way that media is set up, the way that that media tends to highlight sensationalist things that are very dramatic, gives a very false picture of the safety work that we do. Because every time that there is an accident or even an incident, it gets blown up internationally. And you get the feeling that there are accidents and incidents happening all the time. While in reality, what has happened is that aviation and the amount of planes that are flying in the air has been going up, straight up, for the last 30 years, while the level of incidents and accidents has been going down. So you actually have many, many, many more flights flying today than it's ever been, and many, many fewer accidents and incidents than there's ever been. So it just becomes safer and safer and safer. Every single day, literally, we learn and we become better and better. But because social media has come in lately, because of the way that the general media is driven through clicks more and more, it has gone the other way. So those few incidents and accidents that happen, they get blown up so that the general public gets the feeling that it's getting less and less safe, even though it's the complete opposite. So that's probably the biggest misconception. Now, the next misconception, which I've been working quite hard with lately, is what people think about pilots. As in, people have an idea that pilots are these people that have been super tested. They're like fighter astronauts, fighter pilots. in reality, we're just normal people. Like, yeah, we do go through some psychological testing and stuff to make sure that we can handle stress reasonably well and so on. But the rest of it is more procedure, training, and experience that it comes from. So I did a video recently about mental health within aviation, and based on an incident that actually had mental health implications, just to highlight to people that we are people too. Like, yeah, I can get depressed, or someone flying an aircraft can get depressed. They shouldn't be flying then. They should be able to get treated, and then once they're well, they should be able to be let back into the cockpit. While the general public doesn't have that feeling. They feel like that. No, pilots. There should not be any problems. They shouldn't be sick. They shouldn't get depressed. They shouldn't have any psychological issues. And in reality, that's just not the case. So that's one of the things that I'm working with maybe the most at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, the perceptions that people do have. And I never really, I guess I did and didn't see it that way. Like, I knew that pilots were obviously people, but yes, it was on the same level as someone who's done something extraordinary. So like firefighters or athletes, or someone who's just really been put through the ringer, and only the best of the best, physically, mentally, like, end up there. But it's like some elite club. In a way, it kind of is. But I see what you're saying. Like, you're fallible and just people as well. I think I saw a statistic just on what you were talking about before about airline safety going up in terms of less incidents. Wasn't 2023 the last year, the first year that there were no crashes? Is that correct? Or
so there were accidents during 2023. Probably not in the US. It depends a little bit on what's the statistics that you're looking at, and also if you're looking at large passenger transport airplanes, very few. I can't remember now last year if there was any major accidents. Maybe there was one. I just off the top of my head, I can't remember. But we're talking millions and millions of flights that are being flown, and I can't come up with one. So that it says something about the level of safety, especially in the West. In airlines flying under EASA rules, that's European rules, and FAA rules in America, is extremely safe at the moment.
Speaking of that, though, wasn't there, in 2022, there was actually some headlines towards the end of the year talking about how some airlines wanted to change, I guess, the setup of flying in total. So instead of having 2 pilots, they wanted to reduce that number to 1, which seems pretty ridiculous. But maybe you can comment on that. But also, has there been any other changes in the industry that you've seen that have worried you at all?
So there are, first of all, when it comes to the single pilot discussion, you have to understand that from several different points of view. Okay, the pilot salaries are not, they don't cost the airlines that much, right? So the airlines wouldn't necessarily save that much money by reducing the crew from 2 to 1, which is what people have. They tend to think that that's the reason. Instead, what the industry is trying to do is they're trying to stop a global shortage of pilots, because what really costs money for the airlines is not being able to fly their aircraft because they don't have enough pilots. And because of the pandemic and what happened during the pandemic and a decline in terms and conditions during the last 2 decades, it's just become less interesting to become a commercial pilot, which means that people are not willing to fork out $100,000 or 100,000 euros to do the training. And that has slowly led to a decrease of the pilot body. Less and less people available. So the industry is now fighting over the few pilots there are. And this is probably the reason why they're pushing for single pilot operations, because that means that they won't be impacted as badly. Okay, so there you have the kind of the side of the industry. Now, from a safety point of view, it's ridiculous. Right, we don't have the technology needed to do complete single pilot or non-pilot flights. It doesn't exist at the moment, and it probably won't for several decades. So what they're actually talking about when you hear single pilot operations is that they want to be able to take one pilot out of the cockpit in cruise, so that pilot can go and rest, and leave one pilot in the cockpit, and then swap places. And by doing that, they don't need to have 2 sets of crews for these extreme long-haul flights. So in reality, that's what they're talking about. And there still are problems with that. Like, what if the the remaining pilots have to go to the toilet. Who is then watching the flight? So there are definitely problems with it, but I think ultimately we will probably see some type of legislation that will allow single pilot operation in cruise over the sea on long flights. But to think that we will go from 2 pilots to 1 pilot within the foreseeable future is ludicrous. I don't think that it's going to happen within my career, and I still have a good 25 years to go. Now, when it comes to things that are worrying, we have seen an uptick in incidents during the last few years, right? These have mainly been incidents on the runway, so runway incursions in the US, for example. There's been a clear uptick of this, and this is probably due to a shortage of air traffic controllers, together with a shortage of pilots, which means that new pilots are being pushed into the system, so the general level of experience is coming down a little bit, and together with an increase of traffic. So you have all of these factors working together, and you can kind of see how an increase in incidents is an indication that maybe the system is not really ready. The infrastructure is not really ready to handle all of that, and that is a bit worrying.
Yeah, I was hearing reports about that, especially last year. Like the number of incidents in America was in the hundreds, like close calls, essentially. And that was, it was shocking. And there was like, I guess, a call to action that we need to sort that out. So moving on a little bit. So I guess you've flown a lot of planes, and do they feel like different cars, like you drive a Mazda versus a Mercedes or something like that? Do they handle differently? Is there different characteristics to each individual commercial airliner?
Yeah, well, so I only fly the Boeing 737, right? I don't fly any Airbus, for example. So I don't fly many different types. As long as you stay in the same airline, you tend to stay on the same type unless there's many types in the airline. Now, individual aircrafts in the type they won't handle differently. They will just feel a little different. Slight differences in how soft they are in the controls and the thrust levers and things like that. But generally speaking, it would be like you going from one brand new Volvo to another brand new Volvo. Like you wouldn't notice much of a difference between them.
That makes a lot of sense. This is kind of off topic a little bit, but I'm guessing you've had some experience with Flight Simulator and those games or simulators that you'd like to say. Are they accurate? Because as a kid, from ages 5 to like 15, like I played all of them, I love them, but I just wonder if what I'm experiencing in the sim is actually anything like it would be to fly a plane.
So the simulators that are out now, like Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, X-Plane 11 and X-Plane 12, and those are very accurate, right? The models that are in there are extremely accurate, especially when it comes to things like system response. You press this button, the airplane will react in a certain way. That is spot on. What they're not accurate in is the stick and rudder feeling, and when it comes to training new pilots, that's obviously a very, very important thing. This is why you can buy a gaming computer and a flight simulator for like $2,000, but you'll have to pay $23 million for a level D simulator. That's the difference between the two. It's fidelity and how they actually work. So yeah, if you, like for example, if you're doing a type rating, so you're getting trained on the flying a 737, for example, and you've flown an Airbus before, you can definitely use these simulators to verify system responses. So if you want to sit and learn how the autopilot works, for example, or where to find things in the flight management computer and things like that, that works perfectly. It's great. But then you still need to go up and you have to fly the thing and feel how it reacts and handles in order to actually be able to pilot it.
And I guess like on top of that, you have the actual physical feeling of being within the plane. Because I know in some of your videos, you've talked about how in certain, I'm not sure what you call it, but non-visual flying conditions, you can be turning, but it feels like a yaw or something, it can play tricks. So obviously that component is missing, but I just wanted to ask that question because I've always wondered. Okay, so moving on a little bit to, I guess the whole thing that's going on with Boeing right now, obviously it's all over the headlines. Obviously they had those incidents a while back with the MCAS system, but just going to the most recent issue with the door falling off the plane. In your opinion, what do you think's gone wrong there with Boeing? Why do you think their reputation has been tarnished recently?
It's a very long story. Boeing has had issues for the last, better part of 2 decades. It ultimately comes down to the fact that they have been trying to streamline their operation, that they have moved their headquarters away from where the factories are. They're trying to get contractors in to do some of the work, in this case Spirit AeroSystems, which is one of their tier 1 suppliers. And when you're trying to streamline the operation, as in to reduce costs and increase the production rate, you will inevitably come across quality issues, right? That happens in any business. The problem here, of course, is that building aircraft is a safety critical industry, and you cannot have any escapement, right? You cannot allow a quality issue from a supplier to be let through the building process and then out onto the line. Now, the MCAS issue that happened back in the crashes that grounded the 737 MAX initially are not connected to what we're seeing now. Right? That was an issue when they were actually constructing the aircraft and building the software that was driving this MCAS system and everything. So that was part of the design, and partially also the FAA, that allowed that to get out onto the line. What we're seeing now is something completely different. This is quality issues from a supplier that is not being caught properly. But the general public doesn't perceive these as 2 different issues. It identified that it happened to the same aircraft type, even though this latest problem could have happened to a different aircraft type as well, But the previous one was a design issue. This one is not a design issue. This is potentially a quality issue. We're still waiting for the final report. But of course, the overall picture that you get, if you just look at this and you don't know the whole background of it, is like Boeing is slipping when it comes to quality. And the traveling public does not allow that. Traveling public doesn't want to hear about quality issues with the aircraft that they're going to sit in. This metal tube that goes 800 kilometers per hour at 40,000 feet. You don't want to hear about loose bolts in something like that. And this is the problem that Boeing is now facing, that they have lost some of the confidence. Boeing used to be known for their fantastic engineering and for being reliable and being front edge, being the very, very pinnacle of technical engineering and innovation and safety. And now they've had a couple of these incidents that have tarnished that. And the more that piles onto it, the worse that picture then becomes. And of course, seen from the media's point of view, this is like easy game for them. Anytime, anything that now comes up, any bolts that have been found loose or whatever, no matter what the circumstances are, it's now being further blown up into the media, which just gives even more of a worse picture of Boeing, basically. So it's kind of this evil circle that Boeing is going to have to stop in one way or another. And how they're going to do that is what's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think usually media scrutiny is quite unfair or overblown or unjust, but I think in a situation like this, it could actually force Boeing to, really look at what's going on within their structures, like whether it's corporate governance or whether it's incentive structures or trying to cut corners. Like they have to have a serious look at it.
Oh, absolutely. But this is another thing as well that I'd love for people to understand, is that the fact that Boeing is that these things now, of course, the door blowout happened without any, that was an unknown feature, right? This was an escapement, as they call it. This was someone who had forgotten to do something that was then hidden by an internal wall, and it wasn't found. But the fact that Boeing, for example, on a regular basis goes out and tells people that we now have found this. We found an issue here. We are telling all of our airlines that are operating these aircraft to stop, to inspect, and to fix it. This is actually a sign of the system working. Every time that Boeing goes out and publicly declares that we found an issue with this, we need to now do it, which they did at least twice last year. That is a system that should really bring confidence, right? It should, if people understood what it meant, it's actually a transparency. It's a sign that they're a transparent company that is trying to do the best they can. But that can always be turned. So to a certain point, I do agree with you that the increased scrutiny is good here, because there's no question that that Boeing is going to have to look into this deep, and they're probably looking into the management structure as well to see, like, why is this not getting better? You know, why do they keep happening? But on the other side, I also do want to really clarify to people that if Boeing or any company goes out and publicly states that they've found an issue and they're dealing with it, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I actually, the crazy thing is I didn't know that. I didn't know that they publicly announced that they had internally found things and sent out a warning. So I guess that's a good sign. I'd like to come back to the MCAS system a little bit. Can you just describe for viewers who may not know how that system works and why it caused such an issue in those previous incidents?
In a short way, yeah? I'll explain that very quickly.
Yeah, try.
Yeah. Okay, so very, very quickly, very top line. When the 737 MAX came around, it needed to compete with the Airbus A320neo family. And what the Neo family had done was that they had put new engines, bigger and more efficient engines onto the aircraft. Now, putting new efficient engines on an aircraft is the most important thing that you can do to increase efficiency, right? And the Airbus was built from the very beginning. It's a much newer design, so it is much higher off the ground. It has longer landing gear. So for Airbus, it was not a problem to put these bigger engines onto their aircraft. They just slapped on that, did some other smaller aerodynamical changes, and that's it. But for Boeing, it was a big deal because Boeing sits down lower to the ground. So for them to be able to put these newer, bigger engines on, they needed to actually move the position of the engines. And they needed to move them a little bit forward and a little bit upwards, right? That way they wouldn't be in jeopardy of striking the ground if you come in a little bit on like this or something. So they needed to do that. Now, the problem with doing that is that it changes the flight characteristics slightly of the aircraft, right? And this is probably one of the most misunderstood things that around this whole deal. The 737 MAX was never, like, it was always a good aircraft. It always flew well. It was never unstable. Because you see that in newspapers all around, like, yeah, we needed to put MCAS in this system to stabilize the aircraft because it was aerodynamically unstable. No, it was never aerodynamically unstable. It flew perfectly. What it didn't do, though, was fly exactly like the previous model, right? And this is super important because you need to, if the same pilots are going to be flying the previous, the next generation model, the NG, and the MAX, without providing any flight training, difference training between them, then they need to behave exactly the same in all different configurations and situations. But with these new engines sitting where they were, the test pilots found that when you put it in a specific angle, like a high angle of attack, so a high nose angle, it doesn't really feel the same, right? You need to push more than you would on the next generation aircraft. And that was a problem because Boeing could have then certified it like that, but you would have then needed to train the pilots, right? And that would have meant all of these airlines that just wanted to buy the MAX and put it into operation next to all their jets and just let the pilots fly in between them would have now needed to take all of their pilots out, put it into the simulator, do the simulator, and that would have taken time and cost a lot of money. So instead, Boeing said, well, why don't we use this MCAS feature that we already have from the 767 tanker, right? They already had this on a previous model. And what this MCAS system was supposed to do was in very specific situations, so that high angle of attack situation, it would trim forward a couple of times, move the vertical stabilizer in the back forward just a few turns, so that you would get that same feeling, right? It wouldn't be so heavy to push forward. It would be exactly like the NG. So it would essentially, it's a system that would essentially simulate the NG, right? That's all that MCAS was supposed to do. Now then what seemed to have happened was that the initial part was just forward trim a couple of times, that's it. Never do anything more than that, okay? But something crept into the system where the MCAS system would trim forward more than what was thought that it would do. And not only that, every time that the pilots would reset by trimming themselves, the system would trim again, right? It would reset itself and retrim, and reset itself and retrim. This was never in the real specifications, okay? No one in the quality department noticed that this happened. It was just the feedback from the test pilots that created this, and then it was let loose. And this is where people, this is why I was like, why didn't they have several sensors to make sure that this system couldn't do this and couldn't go wrong? But that was because this system wasn't supposed to be dangerous. The system was just supposed to be a tiny little subsystem on the far fringe of the usable spectrum. In most cases, the pilots wouldn't have ever seen MCAS in reality, right? So it didn't need to have any redundancy. It wasn't supposed to be a dangerous system, so therefore it fell under a different category of rules when it came to certification. But then it became dangerous, and with the kind of features that it had when it actually hit the line, it should have needed 3 sensors at least in order to activate. But they still thought that it was an undangerous system. So that's how it kind of came out into the world. And then, of course, it only took a couple of faulty angle of attack vanes to notice that not only does it do more, it also resets, and it makes it very, very dangerous.
So just briefly, I have 2 questions. So you said that MCAS was used previously on a 767, was it?
Yeah, I think it was a 767 tanker. Now, I have to check that out. I don't have it. But the 767 tanker version, the ones that are used to refuel other aircraft, had an MCAS system as well because of the way that they transferred fuel forth and back. So they also had an issue with the balance.
Okay.
So yeah.
So if that was the case, how come there was no resetting and retrimming on that version?
No, not as far as I know, no.
So I don't know. How did that happen then? Like, why is there one that had... Okay, so it's just a thing that happened within Boeing and no one really knows why.
Well, they do know why now, but the thing here is that you have 2 identical systems, but it's not 2 identical issues that they're trying to solve. So with the MAX, they continue, the test pilots continue to give feedback to the production team or to the engineers, and they kept fixing with it. And then you also had computer code that actually governed the system that was written, and there might just been a wrong prompt in the way, that reset. If that reset would have never happened, and as far as I know, that reset shouldn't have happened, like it should never have been there, none of these accidents would have happened, because it would have activated faulty because of the angle of attack vane being wrong, but it would have just trimmed forward a couple of times, and that's it. It would never have gotten into the kind of issues that these poor pilots had to face.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. Like, they probably kind of copied and pasted the system, but what they're trying to solve was different. But a second thing I have is, okay, so you've got a high angle of attack on this new model of plane, and obviously it feels different. You say you have to put more effort into the controls rather than what it previously would have been. So this might just be my ignorance, but why couldn't there be like a bulletin or a notice or just like a briefing saying, hey, like, you might notice this is going to happen in your plane. Like, so don't worry about the MCAS thing, they didn't put that in. It was just the same plane, but with the engines in a different position, but you just tell the pilots, you might notice this. How come something like that wasn't considered?
No, because you cannot. There are certification rules, right, that governs whether something can be done in the same type rating. So every pilot out there is type rated on a specific plane. So I am type rated on the 737-300 to 900 specifically, and now it does include MAX as well. But inside of that certification, inside of my type rating, because I'm supposed to theoretically be able to go from one type to the other, all of these types have to act in the same way in certain circumstances. And high angles of attack is one of those. So if you have an aircraft that suddenly doesn't operate like that, then you cannot operate it within the terms of the same type rating, which is why you then need pilot training in order to fly that particular type. But I need to reiterate again that the MAX without MCAS is flying beautifully. And you see that because now, after the fix, which by the way has not been covered nearly enough, as in what they did to actually fix the plane. Now, if you have a problem with the MCAS system, so the speed trim system under which MCAS falls, there's an issue. Maybe there's another or a couple of angle of attack vanes that goes wrong, that goes faulty, whatever it is. Now the MCAS system just deactivates, and it's not available for the rest of the flight, right? So that's the fix. It's one of the fixes. It's not there anymore, which clearly shows that it was not really necessary to safely fly the aircraft in the first place. Now it's just a non-normal checklist. You take it up and it's like, the MCAS is not going to be available for the rest of the flight. Doesn't matter. You fly it perfectly anyway.
So could you briefly touch on a few checks and balances that are in place to ensure that air travel is safe?
Yeah, so the absolutely most important system that is available to make air travel safety is the, how do I say that? It's the way that anyone can report a problem or a mistake that they've made without feeling that they're risking to lose their jobs, right? So it's the non-punitive kind of, it's the non-punitive essence of aviation as such. So if I make a mistake, and it's an honest mistake, and I report it, which I should do, then what's going to happen is that the airline is going to look into it, they're going to see why it happened, and they're going to potentially give me some extra training if it's needed. But if it's a systemic fault, maybe there's something wrong with the procedure, or at that airport, this happens all of the time, they're going to try to fix that. So they're looking for the core root of the problem, and they're trying to fix that. They're not looking for someone to blame. This is super important, because what happens then is that everyone knows about this, everyone reports it, so we are constantly getting better and safer, right? As opposed to if you're afraid that you might lose your job or whatever, or someone else might lose your job, you don't say it, you keep it secret. And then these things tend to build until you reach an accident. So that safety culture, that open and non-punitive culture, is the most important thing that keeps aviation safe. And this goes for everything, right? On top of that, you have very stringent certification requirements for anything that has to do with aviation, aircraft, aircrew, down to the bolts and nuts that are being used inside of the aircraft. Everything is traceable, everything has been certified, and everything is super checked. This is why aviation feels like there's not much innovation going on. Like, you can see new electrical cars coming out, and you can see self-driving cars coming out, but aviation just stays kind of the same through the decades. That's not because we don't like innovation, it's because of the certification requirements. It has to be shown to be safe in every conceivable situation before anything new is being let out. So it is those two things together create an extremely safe environment, right? Where nothing new happens unless we know that it works, basically.
Yeah, fair enough. On that lack of innovation front, is there anything that you're hearing about or seeing that is innovative that's coming in the pipeline? And also, what do you think in general about the future of aviation? How do you think that's going to pan out?
So there are innovations coming all the time. Right. So the latest, the part that I've seen during my 22 years is the advent of RNAV approaches, so GPS-based approaches, which is probably the biggest thing, because that enables very high precision approaches to be flown into airports that couldn't afford to put in an ILS array, which is what we normally use, because it uses a lot of expensive antennas and a lot of support needed for it. This GPS-based RNAV approaches, they can be used into almost any airport, and it makes it safer. Increases the precision for us, makes it easier, and it also increases the amount of traffic that can come into these airports. So RNAV approaches is probably the biggest change that I've seen. Then you have small safety systems that have been coming on, but it's nothing revolutionary. So when it comes to the second part of your questions, like where can I see aviation is going, there's no question that we have to become greener, that we have to become more environmentally friendly. So over the next few decades, what we're going to see is more innovation happening around, for example, hydrogen aircraft. I'm pretty sure that hydrogen is going to be one of them. There's going to be a lot of investments into sustainable aviation fuels, so SAF, which are basically more green alternative to normal jet fuel. Battery powered aircraft, I don't really believe in. I don't think that there is enough energy density in the existing batteries. But if new battery technology comes around, which it might do, then that might change. But at the moment, it's just not possible to do. So this is why I can see hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuel being the two closest, like, low-hanging fruits. But there's no question that more super efficient aircraft are going to be created. Engine technology is going to continue to change. So the CFM RISE engine that I've talked about on my channel, for example, is a new type of open fan engine, which kind of looks like a turboprop. It looks like we're going back to propellers, but in fact, it's a hyper efficient jet engine that's going to come in the middle of next decade, and that's going to change the game completely for a lot of different aircraft.
Very cool. Very cool. It's actually kind of funny because you said you didn't believe in battery-powered aircraft, and I agree with you. I think that once with planes, they get lighter as you fly, but with battery planes, it's kind of just dead weight that you carry the whole way. Though I was actually helping work for a company that was importing a small, super light sport electric aircraft for flight training.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've heard of Pipistrel, Slovenian company, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, the Pipistrel Electro. Yeah.
So I've actually flown in one of those and took the yoke for a couple of minutes. But so they do exist. But I think for that ultralight sport stuff only, I don't think. Yeah, I wouldn't imagine a commercial jet having that or anything.
No,
so,
and it's like I've flown that one as well. I did a video when I was out trying that one, and it's a super cool. It's actually one of the few aircraft that I felt like buying myself because it's so cool. Like it's so simple and it's so cool. But the problem is obviously that the range is just 1 hour, and effective training is about 45 minutes maximum. And in order for it to even be usable at that level, you need to have at least 2 hours of range on it. So, the problem is to scale it up, to put that amount of batteries and that amount of current moving through into the engines. It's much harder to scale up than people think. So I have a problem seeing, I can see some type of hybrid propulsion being used, so that you have batteries that could be used in cruise, for example, where there's not that much thrust needed, and then you have conventional engines using sustainable aviation fuel for takeoff and for other parts. You could see how that it's going to be super expensive, and that's another thing I could probably put onto here when you talk about the future of aviation. If you want to do long haul flights reasonably cheap, do it before it's too late, because I don't see aviation going anywhere else than towards higher prices, generally. If I were to guess, within 20 years or so, an economy ticket now would be costing the equivalent of a business class ticket now.
Okay, wait. Okay, let's just unpack that a little bit. Like, do you think it's because of the shortages that are happening, and it's just going to cost more to run these? I don't know. Why is that?
So if we want to go greener, and if there's all legislation points to more rules towards green aviation, if that's going to happen, the only way that we can do that in a conceivable way in the future is to use sustainable aviation fuel or hydrogen, both of which are much more expensive to produce, and we're talking 3-4 times the price of current jet fuel. So only the price increase in fuel is going to motivate higher prices. On top of that, it's likely that we're going to see taxes increasing and government reductions in available flights. So all of these things playing together with the fact that there is a shortage of pilots, cabin crew, engineers, and so on, it's going to mean higher salaries for those. If you put all of these things together, and the fact that it is incredibly cheap to fly now compared to what it was back in the 80s and 90s, for example, we are going back there for sure.
Wow, that's something I did not expect, but makes complete sense when you think about it. But I do want to thank you today for taking your time out and chatting. It's been great. I learned a lot of good information that you provided. Really appreciate it. Is there anything that you wanted to sign off on, or like just tell the audience at all?
No, I mean, flying is just it's safer than you think it is. No matter how safe you think it is safer than that. So enjoy flying. Like, if you are a nervous flyer out there, I know that saying this won't help, but I really believe, I've been flying for 22 years without anything really happening to me of any significance, and that's flying daily. Aviation is fantastic. It is an incredibly interesting world, and if you come and visit my channels, you will also notice that there's a lot of things that you can learn from the aviation world, from how we operate aircraft and from how we operate in the crew in a team environment, that can be applied to many other businesses. And I really think that that's something that we're going to see as well. That many other businesses are going to take after us when it comes to decision making, when it comes to error handling and so on.
So everybody, check out Mentour Pilot. Brilliant channel. So I'm sure you guys will all enjoy it. And thanks so much, Peter, for joining us. And
Thank you very much.
We'll see you next time in the next episode. Cheers.